Welcome to the CastNet podcast. My name is Mahendra Gasai.
My name's Kevin Rain.
And I'm Ryan Sahadeo.
And together we are CastNet. Woo! All right, today, welcome to our first podcast. We had some technical difficulties last week. We were supposed to release, but we found out at the end of our recording that we had, let's just say a couple mics were muted all the way through the movie, or through the podcast actually. But we hopefully got some things worked out, and we'll be able to releasing our first podcast. We're a weekly podcast, and we have various topics that involve pop culture in general, and just lifestyle choices as well. So, welcome to our very first podcast. So please, hopefully we have some bumps. We can eliminate some of those bumps in the road along the way. As mentioned before, we are CastNet. So our first topic this podcast is going to be about West Indian culture, because all three of us are from the West Indian culture, living in the U.S. and born here, raised here. But our parents and so on is from the Caribbean at some point, and came over here, and we want to talk more about the West Indian culture and us growing up about here. But before we get into that, how's everybody's week been going?
Going good, man. Really good. Can't complain, and appreciate everyone out there listening to the new pod. We appreciate your patience getting through this, but can't complain.
Gotta love when tech guys have tech issues that we try to work through, but super appreciative of everybody tuning in, and my week's been great.
Fantastic. Ryan's been away for a little bit. He had some personal things going on, but while we were in town here, we both Kevin and I saw, not together, but individually, we both saw the Odyssey. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of things going on now that's raving about the Odyssey right now. I don't know.
You don't say.
Yeah, I know. Ryan, have you get a chance to see either previous versions of it or current one?
I've seen previous versions. I haven't seen the current one.
Oh, wow. Well, Kevin and I had the same kind of reaction, and a friend of mine who also saw it with me was just like, wow, this is good, but I don't know if it's to the extreme that everybody's talking about. And I know that's a little controversial for our first podcast to say that, but yeah, I think it was kind of just, it was good. I enjoyed it. I don't know if it was the spectacle that everyone says it was. What are your thoughts, Kevin?
Yeah, and I try to be objective as I can, and I think the name behind it, just Nolan's, just his tag on movies, I think is associated with excellence, and I kind of wanted to feel that walking out of the movie, but it just left a little bit more desired. And for me, I saw it with a large group that strangely, everyone had overwhelmingly positive feedback about it. So kind of odd. So I was glad I got to download a bit with Mahendra just to kind of share a similar mindset of just a little bit of critique where, I thought some kind of cast decisions, some kind of performances were just a little bit lackluster, but yeah, I think we're of the few of that take. If you look up any reviews on that movie, been overwhelmingly positive. So interesting. I'm usually kind of with the crowd with overwhelmingly positive reviews for Nolan movies. I have critiques for many, but overall enjoyed most of them. This was one of the few that walking out, I'm like, I didn't love it. And sat with that for a while. But I'm giving it more time thinking about it, but it has not changed my mind. So, what were your impressions, Ryan, of the trailers or any of the social media feedback? It's kind of been really.
I've heard mixed feedback, and I think I haven't seen much of the positive feedback, but I've seen some of the negative, which I would call critiques rather than actual feedback. And I think anyone that's actually critiqued it is very similar in nature to you. They're saying, okay, well, Nolan's producing it. Anytime you go to see a Nolan movie, cannot go wrong. And I think they wanted to feel like it was going to be a great movie. I think a lot of people felt that he didn't stay true to the story per se. Like I said, I haven't seen it, so I can't comment specifically on it. But I feel like if you're telling me that there's cast issues and, no pun intended for our podcast here, but if you're telling me there was cast issues or you feel like he could have done better in picking some of the actors or actresses in the movie, I would say that, you know what, it's kind of a letdown because I think he has usually a better judge of character for that.
Yeah, and the casting decisions, I think, were the critique of that was trending prior to the movie, just like faces that you would not typically associate, which I actually kind of push back against. Like, it's a fictional story. I think you can have some freedom to be more diverse there. I think that reminds me of like Game of Thrones critique, like, why are they all the same race? Part of it has to do with kind of like where they film and kind of the region there and just the demographics. We can't import all of these different nationalities to be a part of the film. But for me, I think like the main one, I have minor critiques of the performances, and the actors are, it's an ensemble cast. There are really talented folks in that movie. But I think for me, it was like the storytelling style of Nolan being very disjointed. And I think he loves telling stories in that way that keeps the audience guessing, like what's happening next. And, I think the extreme version of that would be a Tenet, like where it's like the film is going in reverse, and to the audience, to a newcomer to a Nolan film, that could be very disorienting to, just expecting more of like a linear storytelling style from start to finish, which, the Odyssey is kind of one of the greatest like literary works of all time, arguably. So you kind of hope, and there's so much depth in that, you kind of hope it is told linear. I think if that was like a little bit more top of mind for people, the story mechanics of it, it'd be fine to kind of do all of these cuts throughout time and jump around the story. But yeah, there was many points in that movie where it's just like, everyone's like, okay, how long has he been away? How long has this war taken place? Why is it taking him so long to get back? Did he get back? Is he stranded? Like, there is a lot of guessing that I think is intentional by Nolan, but with that depth in the movie, I don't think that is helpful to the audience, because like, I think in other stories he's told, like, they've been more original and kind of he's been able to have those liberties. But when you're trying to kind of like brush up on that, on that literary work of the Odyssey and just Homer's work, like, I think it's been some time since you got to dust off that. So it'd be helpful to do that in a linear fashion. So that was just my critique. It just felt a bit disjointed, which is intentional, but I don't know if that's the best storytelling device for a work like the Odyssey.
I guess we'll let the gross revenue speak for itself.
I know.
Because
I'm alone in that.
I'd like to think that.
Yeah, we're very alone in that, because the gross revenue on that is breaking records left and right. So
I would say for a lot of people, it's probably people's first time being exposed to the Odyssey. I mean, there's us that kind of grew up around that story and probably reading it for like English class or something. But for a lot of people, it could very well be their first exposure to the story itself. In which case, if it's fragmented, as you mentioned.
I beg to differ, though, because a lot of people that I'm talking about that really like this is not just online, it's in person. And these people are older than I am and have been exposed to many versions of the Odyssey. And they just found it the best thing they've seen since sliced bread. So it's really interesting because it comes from a big array from audiences, right? But, to each his own. We saw that, and I thought it was a good movie. I'm not going to say that it's a bad movie. I thought it was a good movie, and some of the characters that kind of like took me out some of the casting. But other than that, I thought it was fine because I thought it was a good movie. I just didn't see the giant spectacle that everybody was making about it in general. But I think that wraps up what we've been doing, and I think we should move into the next segment, which is going ahead and going into our topic of the West Indian experience.
Right. Yeah. So we wanted to have an episode on that because it's a big part of like who we are. We're obviously from the culture. We all have our own experiences of the West Indian experience, quote unquote, and that kind of being part of that diaspora in America. So, I think we're excited to kind of go on more on that.
But that would kind of lead us to pretty much our next part of that evolution, which is like our journey, right? Which is growing up, being into our upbringing with parents that came from West Indian culture, now living in the United States, us being first generation American, and first generation Canadian American, right? And both over there, and how that really affected us growing up with parents who didn't really know the system of the U.S. other than working hard and doing that stuff, but they didn't really understand the culture of the U.S. right back then, and understanding how everything worked or even dealt with. I even remember. When I was younger, trying to help my parents through that process. Well, what do you feel? What are your thoughts about that, Kevin?
Yeah, like I felt like we were like the guinea pigs for understanding the culture through our parents. Like they were learning through us. Like it's different from kind of a generational story where you kind of have the stories of your parents and kind of like the neighborhood you grew up, like the community, like you have that history built in where we didn't. I think it's common for most immigrant stories. So. I think the culture is drastically different, and everyone has their own kind of learning curve there, city by city. New York City for me and Mahendra, and then Canada, understanding that market for Ryan, his family, and then New York eventually as well. It was a trial and error process trying to figure out kind of like where you fit in and understanding like your connection to. West Indian culture through your parents and American culture, understanding that for the first time, like not having like that baked in knowledge from your parents. It was a unique upbringing, I think, for me in particular. I do have the Richmond Hill story, which I know many folks do, but in the early '90s, I would say. And very much not the same Richmond Hill that it is today, and not as many West Indians, Guyanese, just, diversity-wise, it was limited. I would say it was mostly, whites and, a few Hispanic families. Like we were the only Indian family of Indian descent and in that neighborhood. So, kind of no reference point of just like what it means to be a West Indian within New York City or within America. So, for all I knew, my experience was American and, New York City just kind of being what most people think of when they think of America. So that's kind of, the quote unquote American experience on an international scale. So I felt a strong connection to, that identity, at least for the majority of my childhood, up until like when I was like introduced to West Indian culture as like cities evolve. And Richmond Hill did a bit of that towards the late '90s, and then my family kind of relocated to where we are today within Central Florida. So that market was very different as well in the same regard. Very limited diversity there when I moved in, but cities kind of got more diverse as kind of the world's population expands, and obviously a big global city as well. So still kind of that learning curve, just figuring out West Indian culture, early part of life. But, as it got more saturated in those cities, obviously I kind of see those like stories of West Indians, and then they kind of have their understanding through, what they've brought over, and then kind of settling there for a while. So it was interesting. It's a bit disconnected for me for a good part of my life, and then trying to figuring out how I can retrofit my experiences into the West Indian experience and just being part of that culture, because I am a part of it. Just kind of growing up outside of it was unique for me. But yeah, I know it's not the same for everyone. I think, Ryan came a little bit later into New York City as well, so probably has a different lens as well, just seeing that city evolve probably a little bit more than I did during my time in the '90s.
Yeah, I'd like to say, well, when my parents came, they were the first of our family to be here. So similar to Mahendra, they had to figure it out. And I think back then it wasn't as easy. Like I know they've told me stories about like the amnesty program when they were filing their paperwork. They actually had to go to a church to do it because they weren't able to do it directly themselves. They didn't know where to go. A lot of their friends didn't even think amnesty was a real thing. So a lot of people that could have had the chance to get their citizenship didn't, just because they were afraid. They didn't know. They didn't know who they could trust. They didn't know who they could talk to. And that's where these churches were kind of set up to do that. Once they did kind of establish themselves in the city, I would say that they were the beacons for like the other family members, and so they would sponsor the family members and the rest of the family would come. So by the time I grew up around the family participating in different events and stuff like that, so I had a little bit of an exposure to what West Indian culture was, but to me it was just normal. I didn't realize that, oh, it's a particular culture within, you know, the city subsection or whatever. And similar to you, Kevin, like I would say a lot of our listeners grew up in Richmond Hill. I lived right outside of Richmond Hill. I was in Jamaica. So yes, there was a few Caribbean people there, but I mean, growing up, it's like, oh, you see someone brown, you think, oh, well, you know, I'm brown, they're brown, like they must be from where I'm from, but you don't have any grasp of like where they are until you actually talk to them. I would say my first real exposure into the culture was until about high school, when like by this point I had grown up with quite a few people that I've gone to like elementary school, middle school with, and then I see back in high school, so I already kind of knew these familiar faces, and it wasn't until I spoke to them in high school that I realized, oh, we're all from the Caribbean, like, and what does West Indian mean to us? It's like, well, we're connecting with like-minded people as we went to school together. So I'd say a good chunk of my experience has just been purely American, with little dabs and bits and pieces of West Indian culture thrown in, and it wasn't until I like got to high school that's when I really actually embraced it, because the rest of the kids that I went to school with embraced it. And that was our way of identity for us.
That's good. I kind of want to. I'll spin back to that a little bit more because we're talking about more about balancing both the American and Guyanese culture right there too. But the experiences I had growing up in connection there is that, like you were mentioning it too before. Like I remember when I first started school, and it was interesting because my parents understand school, right? But they don't understand how everything else went with it. So if I bring something home or paperwork or anything like that, they would read over it, but then they will also ask me questions, you know, about like something, did they clarify some things for you? And then we could talk about it. And it was always interesting because they wanted to clarify some things because they've never experienced it before, right? So they're taking the advice from, you know, the young 5 or 6 year old that's going to clarify some things for, you know, what the school wants out of certain things, you know, about like what our expectations are, you know, with grades and everything else and stuff like that. But my parents were really involved, and that was really good. So they were, you know, they went to the schools a lot, and they got themselves involved, and they probably worked twice as hard as most other parents because they tried to understand the system, right, and everything that was going on around them, which you know, when you, upon reflection, and even now just talking about it, I just realized about how much, you know, dedication and time they took to kind of understand that system, to make things easier for the rest of us, right, as we went through it. Like I said, too, and you know, kind of spin it back to what Ryan was mentioning, too, as far as, like, identity and balancing the American Guyanese, like, so, like, as well. So my only connection to the West Indian culture really was through my parents and through my aunt, uncle, and cousins that were here. So there was only one aunt and uncle and a couple cousins. And when I was really young, I got exposed to a lot more of my family later in years, high school and beyond. But in those formative years, it was mostly just American. You know, I grew up rooting for the Yankees, rooting for the New York Giants on sports, and rooting for the New York Knicks, right? And I didn't watch a lick of cricket. And my dad is a very, very, very hardcore fan of cricket. He plays cricket. He played at a high level of cricket. He still plays cricket, and he enjoys watching it. But I don't, you know, and it's kind of like a cultural gap there, right? Because that's a big part of West Indian culture is something like sports that attaches to them. And I really don't have a connection to it. I even tried playing when I was younger. When I moved down to Florida, my dad played on a team, and I played, and I enjoyed playing. I won't say I didn't enjoy playing. I did. It was more of that connection with my dad, though, and I liked kind of playing with him and kind of hanging out with all of his friends and learning more about what it is that the game means to them, and then understanding that I kind of like to play. I didn't play very well. I played okay. And that's because, once again, I was more into the American culture, right? So I played a lot of those sports a lot better, right? Because I spent a lot more time doing that, and I spent like more time playing basketball, even though I'm like 5'3", and and baseball, which I was actually really decent at, and then and then some football too, right? So I played a lot of that, and in growing really attached to those kind of things, and that's really interesting because as we grow older, and we want to have more connections with our culture, I find it at sometimes a disconnect too, because my dad watches a lot of this stuff and I don't, and so that's a weird kind of attachment, kind of connection there. But at the same time too, my mom watches a lot of football, which is kind of funny, and she just watches a lot of football, and I do watch football, and she watches it with me, and so that's kind of a connection we have there. So that's kind of interesting. Some of the balances though, that were kind of identity is that as you're growing up more American, and you're not seeing the American culture, which is not by any color, right? It's just American culture, and but you still have that. You still feel like an outsider to or at least I do, to the West Indian culture, the Guyanese culture, because as I got older and I started meeting more family and meeting more friends, and meeting more people out that are in that culture, I realized that I didn't know a lot. I right down to the names of food, or names of events, or even stuff in our own religions that we practice, right? So, like for you guys, like we're like I'm kind of like part Christian and part Hindu, because I kind of grew up in both of those systems religious wise, which might confuse a lot of people. But coming from Guyana, my parents coming from Guyana, that's actually kind of a common thing, because it was once a British colony, and they have kind of a mixture of both of those religions over time. But but with like friends, sometimes I felt like I wanted to hide stuff, because like part of my culture, I wanted to hide it because it's not the norm where everybody does.
Code switching.
How was that?
Code switching.
Yeah. You kind of hide some of that stuff. You don't want to kind of bring it up or talk about it, and then there's some things you kind of then did share with people later on who maybe asked or was more inquisitive, but then you were kind of just very shy about sharing that kind of stuff, because you didn't really. One thing, I didn't know a lot, but number two, I also knew it was different than what everybody else was doing, right? So it didn't matter if there was African American, Hispanic, or white, or anything. They seem to be more similar with each other than a West Indian person, because it was just very, very strange, right? So that connection, even when I was growing up, even in high school, I kind of mentioned to you guys too, there was Indian people in my high school, but they were like from India, which is a completely different culture than us West Indians, right? So we share a connection, but we are kind of different in many ways. And even with them, I found that it was like a difference, right? So you kind of felt isolated a lot. I felt isolated quite a bit, to be honest, in that regards. In many regards, I'm really connected, especially to all those people I knew back then. I didn't have a large group of friends. I knew a lot of people, but I had a core group of friends. And with those core group of friends, we connected because we were friends. And, that didn't matter along the way. And we liked the same things. We liked to go to the movies. We liked to hang out with each other. My friends, Mike and Raymond, that I hung out with in high school, they were, shout out to them if they're listening and watching. But they were my core group of friends in high school. And then when I got to college, once again, it was the same experience. I didn't have a lot of Indian people around, or West Indian crowd. It was different. But I had a core group of friends who are really close friends today that are not part of my culture, but but we're connected through our love of computer science, and our love of engineering, and our love of our UCF experience where we went, and then and our love of friendship, right? So, and we're connected in many ways, in those kind of ways, and activities and everything that's so on. But then there was an interesting connection with like my family and people in West Indian culture, because there's like even right down to the music. I don't even listen to the music. A lot of soca is really embedded into our culture. Soca, chutney, different variations of that, right? And I don't really listen to that. I like it, and when I'm at parties, I enjoy it, and it's something that I listen to, but it's not on my iPod, right, or on my iPhone. That's not an iPod, right? Or I listen to it on Apple Music or anything, right? I just kind of I think it's fun and it's enjoyable, but that's like a really big disconnect where I see that they're really tied into it, and sometimes I'm isolated when I see that, because I'm like, wow, I'm not really connected that way. And then there's a lot of those factors I'm not really connected to. But it's okay. It's not like it's feeling isolated from them. They're not. They don't think about it at all. I'm fully integrated with them. But I personally feel that way because it's just like I don't have that connection. I don't see that connection. I kind of leave myself as a 50-50 person. Nobody knows me 100%, right? I have the American culture side of me and then the West Indian culture side of me, and nobody knows that full 100% person that I've grew up in, because I was a blend of both cultures, right? They know one or they know the other, right? But anyway, Kevin, what's your experiences about like the connection with West Indian culture and American culture?
Yeah, I'm like reflecting back to just like my story as well, just hearing yours, there's some parallels there. And I think like it's evolved dramatically, from early childhood to where I am now. And I think, it's unfortunate that the identity factors in so much into just like how people interact with you, how people connect, how people treat you later on in life. As a kid, you don't have an understanding of like racial identity or, a little bit about nationality, and your parents, and that's kind of your world. It's still growing, but your friends are not obviously dictated by, what country their parents hail from, their ethnicities. It's just your friends. Like you have this shared experience. You're in school together. You're playing sports together. You have common interests, as just the foundation of most friendships. But I think the experience you're describing, I have a lot of those feelings of just like being a bit of like a pariah there, a bit of the outcast, othered, and I think that's common for a lot of like minorities in general. Just as you get older, I think you start to factor in your awareness of just like identity and like just like racial identity, cultural identity, just upbringing. Like you have a deeper understanding. You're learning more about yourself, so it comes up amongst everyone. Just trying to understand what's your story, who are you, and I remember there was a lot of moments where that strangely like tripped me up, where I was annoyed that it did. I thought I had a strong understanding of who I was, of being American. And I think a lot of that had changed. I think it's both a combination of like the demographics changing in the city I grew up in, and then just where I am in life, just my awareness of the demographics changing, just having that just awareness, I think, changed my perspective a bit. But I remember there was a couple of moments where, I think it exacerbated that feeling of being kind of an outsider of both cultures. So, as like it got more diverse, and then I'm getting exposed to more people that look like me, I'll say, and are of the West Indian culture, are Guyanese, first gen and second gen. So there's this unique thing where you like try to find your own people, and I think all of them had good intentions, just trying to connect with someone that has something that's shared, something that's in common, and the most visible thing would be race. So they would come up to me, and I had similar experiences. Like it's like, oh, you're Guyanese, that's cool. I'm Guyanese too. Like that's we're like one of the few that are in the school, in this community. That's so great to meet another person. I'm like, yeah. And then they're like, hey, like, do you listen to this artist? Have you had this food? Do you go to this church? I'm like, I've never heard of any of those three. And then it's like, really? It's like, are you sure you're West Indian? Are you sure you're Guyanese? It's like, yeah. And it's, they get this weird kind of like, this weird othered feeling from people that look like you as well. Like, it hadn't come up as much. I think I kind of like
shattered the foundation a bit, because like I was kind of operating under the assumption that, yeah, I'm very much an American, I'm built into that culture, I am, but I cannot just push away that experience and my connection to the West Indian culture. And I think I'm understanding my connection to it, and it's broadening as I'm getting older and getting more exposed to it. But yeah, that kind of like threw me for a loop a bit. There was a lot of moments like that, just interactions with the Guyanese culture through peers and just through just the evolving nature of the city and the demographics, like being more inundated in it. It felt more isolating through that experience. So there was a lot of catch up that I had to do just to kind of like understand like the slangs, the music, you know, even the way of speaking. It wasn't immediately clear to me. You know, I think in a lot of West Indian countries, like it's English, but you know, it is.
It's more like a Creole English.
Yes, it's similar to like how, you know, the Creole languages kind of are a blend of even languages in themselves, but you know, it's definitely can be foreign, you know, to the first time listening to it and understanding and parsing it together. So, you know, being able to understand them, not being able to connect with them on the things that inherently make you Guyanese was disappointing, disheartening. You know, I always knew it was of my background, but I just could not find a way to connect to it. So it wasn't until later in life where, you know, I just spent more time being more integrated. They become more integrated as well. I think when you first come to this country as an immigrant, like you are who you are with your experiences from that country. So it's hard for someone that doesn't share that to connect with you immediately. As they became more American, like we kind of met in the middle, but it certainly was a balancing act for me of kind of understanding how to mesh the American identity and the West Indian identity, because they're both there, they're both valid, they're both a part of who I am. But yeah, I think it's a common balancing act for many people, and sometimes the scales are not as much on level, but everyone's starting point's different. So just curious to hear yours, Ryan, if that was somewhat similar. Or...
Yeah, I'd say similar to Mahendra's, and I think a lot of our listeners that are going to be listening to this episode, my parents were sticklers for education. They came to the U.S. with the intention of giving our family, or what was then going to be our future family, a better life than they had growing up in Guyana. In fact, ironically enough, they lived longer here in the U.S. than they did in Guyana before they came here. So my dad was more of the stickler for education as opposed to my mom. So for him, it was easy to understand the concept of a report card, you know, checking in to make sure I did my homework, helping me with my homework over time. But as we're doing that, learning about the American system while we're at it through me, right? There were things he had to learn for the citizenship test, but then beyond that, he didn't really care to pick it up. And he would learn a lot more of it through me, through like chemistry class or history class, whatever the case may be. And I think over time, that kind of evolved into kind of what it is now, where like as he got more exposed and as both of them got more exposed to the American way of doing things, it became somewhat of a constant comparison back and forth between how they used to do it in Guyana, you'd hear stories all the time, versus how things are done here in the States, right? I'd say for me, a lot of it, so because of that constant pressure of like doing well in school, I was always a bit more on the top of my class. I always had to bring home like 100. God forbid I brought home a 95. First question out of my parents' mouths, what happened to the other 5 points, right? I think it's very similar to what a lot of our listeners would say they've grown up with. And I'd say because of that, I became more studious. And as a result of becoming more studious, I became more like prone to being bullied because I never felt like I fit in, even with my own fellow Guyanese people, because they just weren't as motivated to do well. I'm not saying they didn't do well. A lot of them were competing with me for, you know, top 5 of the class, but they're just, some parents just, you know, they brought their work ethic from Guyana to the U.S. and it translated. And then there are others that were kind of, you know, bit of hit or miss, right, depending on what it was. And I think all of that influenced my my growing up in the American system, because I have friends who I couldn't understand why they were like doing certain things that they did. And so like I had, similar to Mahendra, like I knew a lot of people. I still know a lot of people, but I only have a very small core group of friends. And I think that in trying to balance who I am as an American versus who I am as a Guyanese, it wasn't like I'd hear from all people all the time, oh, you're not Guyanese, you're American. It's like, well, my ethnicity is Guyanese. I identify as a Guyanese. I'm aware I'm an American because I was born here in New York. But to me, as I got older, I became more involved in the culture primarily through, like, similar to Mahendra, my dad was a huge cricketer. He had his own cricket teams. Shout out to Silver Star Cricket Club. He joined a secondary club after he shut down Silver Star, which was Albion Cricket Club. Shout out to the guys there. And so I would go with him to the park, and I'd watch them play. I'd watch him score keep. But similar to Mahendra, I never understood the game. I still don't understand the game for the life of me. I understand.
Well, I mean, I have to make a correction there. I understand the game completely. I wasn't very good at it, and I think what I couldn't understand was just like the passion for the game.
Sure.
Right, because they grew up with the passion for the game because they played it since they were young.
Yeah.
I didn't really have the passion for it. I had a liking for it. I enjoyed it while I did it, but it wasn't something beyond playing with my dad or playing with the teams that
Sure.
he played on. Other than that, there was no extension of me. I'm going to go home and find out and watch all the ICC games or something like that, right?
Fair enough.
But yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Fair enough. And I would say, for the life of me, I couldn't figure it out to this day. I still don't understand it. He tries to explain, and it goes in one ear and out the other. I grew up on American football, soccer, tennis, volleyball, everything American, and I was pretty good at all the sports except for baseball. That was it. Similar to Mahendra, I grew up rooting for the Yankees, the Giants. My dad's a huge Giants fan. And I think as time went on, my exposure to the culture just became more integrated because I think starting in 2008, if I remember correctly, my dad and a group of his friends created a reunion for members of their part of Guyana that they're from, Berbice. And you got to meet other people from the country, and you got to see just how different everybody was. And that as we kept doing those every year, I became more and more involved in the culture and learning a bit more about it, understanding how we spoke, how we kind of identify things, the language, which surprisingly enough, a lot of our culture identifies with it just because of our roots, right? We come from the Indian continent through the British indentured servitude system, and so a lot of that carried over, and so learning the language in terms of Creolese or Bhojpuri or even versions of Hindi that all of us kind of speak on a day-to-day basis was interesting, because for me it was like, oh well, this is my chacho, and that's my dad's brother. But in the American system, you can't go and say, oh, that's my chacho. They have no freaking reference for that. They're just like, oh, this is my dad's brother. They understand that, right? And so navigating those little nuances.
By the way, Ryan, there's no reference for me either because I don't know either. Because I call everybody uncle and auntie.
Fair.
As opposed to I still don't understand those words. Like I understand people use them. They've
Yeah.
used it around me.
Yeah.
I've tried to learn them a little bit. Even though if I learned them, I don't think I even feel like that's a word I would use because
You're so accustomed to.
I'm so accustomed. I was born using a different phrase, right? So that feels natural to me.
Sure.
The things that don't feel natural to me is like the vernacular, like you're just saying right there,
Fair.
right? So that stuff doesn't feel that natural to me. But sorry for interrupting you.
No, fair enough.
That's a good example of just there is these defining moments I think we all have had with the culture of just it kind of shining light on, wow, we really don't understand it, or just a unique characteristic of that culture, whether if it's the terminology, the words used. We talked about foods as well, but I remember just as people are kind of understanding the Guyanese culture as well, outside of the culture, as I mentioned, those cities had evolved, and there was a couple of moments I remember that struck me, because you never think of it from the outsider's perspective until probably later in life, you kind of get a little bit more introspective, obviously. But I remember like things like some of my friends like, that's strange. You guys like every birthday, you guys all feed each other cake. And like, or like, your weddings take like 5 or 6 days. Why do you need so much time off? Or like, there's like some unique experiences for the West Indian and Guyanese culture, I think, that are just so inherently like assigned to that culture that, you know, they're so foreign, I think, to American culture, probably a lot of other cultures. I'm sure there's some overlap in the West Indies, but I remember there was like certain moments like that where I'm like, oh, wow. Actually, on the plus side, I am connected to this culture because I do recognize that it does sit outside of the American culture quite a bit on, you know, wedding culture, if it's like religious elements, if it's like the words, the food, the familial terms. It's a unique experience, and I think that all plays into it. Just understanding that builds your knowledge of it, and then you're able to kind of like then take it a step further and kind of bring people into the culture, which is nice. You know, they're becoming a larger minority, and I think it's the integration with other cultures is bigger, like more interracial marriages are happening, and people are getting a broader sense of that culture in larger numbers, especially within the U.S. So it's interesting, those defining moments and the terminology. So sorry to cut in front of you, but
No, that's fair. I did want to make one kind of last point similar to Mahendra's, where like I grew up in a mixed religion household as well, so that was really interesting. And so like neither one of my parents, I would describe them as being non-religious, but I grew up learning about Hinduism from my father's side of the family and Islam from my mother's side of the family. I was raised in both religions. I myself do not lean toward one nor the other religion. I just was aware of it. We do have Christians in our family as well, so I got to learn about all three of the major religions, and I think that was a great experience. Tying into kind of like the West Indian culture as a whole, it was interesting because growing up, I'd go to Jundies, I'd go to readings, I would go to, you know, prayer services, and it reminded me of stories of my parents that they would say, like growing up in Guyana, nobody really kind of made religion a thing. It was like, oh, well, you know, today's Diwali, great. All the Muslims and Christians would come over and get, you know, prasad. And when it was Ramadan, you know, they would, hey, did you make sirni? You know, like it was so interconnected that it just felt like that growing up. So for me, I didn't identify it as something odd. It just became normal after a while. But I can understand that, like, how that would look to someone who's outside of the culture, right? And similar to you, Kevin, I didn't actually think about, like, why do we feed each other cake? I see that happening at every birthday, and I'm like, it never occurred to me to even think that. But yeah, I would assume that, like, other people that just feed the birthday person cake, right?
And it's anecdotally, but really what kind of heightened my awareness of it was someone at that function was not of the culture. So that's an interesting theme too amongst these experiences, is like when someone, which is good, like educating them on it, but you know, prior to having done that, it really is kind of jarring, just like how like foreign this is to someone, like how far they are from this culture. So, and I think that broadens your understanding as well. Being able to teach something is taking it a step further, which actually can kind of like call out how limited understanding you might have. Because I remember struggling at times, like, hey, I actually don't have an answer for why that is the way it is.
And it was always what was done, right?
Yeah,
you just never
much.
questioned it at some point, right?
You didn't have a need to, because everyone kind of had this shared limited understanding. So
right. That actually brings me to a great point I like to toss out there for maybe to wrap up our conversations there. So, introducing friends. So, friends with our culture. How about that? Relationships. So, dating within or without, you know, how that goes. Because there's a scenario for both of those things where I like to talk about more. And also food. So those three things.
Sure.
So food, our relationship with food, relationships with significant others, and the relationship in general with just like with friends or coworkers or friends. You could put them in the same category if you want to, although they're different. And then kind of just like others, basically, of like how you connect with the culture there and what are your experiences with that. You know, we started with Kevin a lot, so let's go ahead with Ryan and see what let's kick it off.
All right, I'll work backwards on that one. So connection with friends. My friend group, we're diverse. I have pretty much one friend from everywhere you can think of, and I don't look at them as being like, for example, I have two friends named Michael, one of whom is Jamaican, the other is Ecuadorian. They're both American. The Jamaican one is obviously of a darker skin tone, right, and would identify himself as black. I don't. I say he's Jamaican. And I relate to him on the Caribbean side of the fence. I'm aware that his skin color is what it is, but I don't see his skin color as an identifier. And so our friend group is pretty much very much like that. We don't identify on skin color. We identify more on shared values, shared, experiences, shared moments, right? In terms of significant others, I would say it's funny because I've dated a variety of different women over the years. And it...
Wow, that's a flex.
No, and I wasn't really saying it as a flex. I was saying it to make a point. And the point being that growing up, I wasn't allowed to date. In fact, I wasn't allowed to date until I graduated high school and started college. And then all of a sudden it became, when are you getting married? And I think that's a common trope for all of us in the West Indian community. It's like our parents want us to be married, and supposedly marriage is going to make us happy. We'll let the listeners decide on whether or not that's actually true. But with that being said, I didn't know that like I had like a curfew or anything like that. I was dating this girl who was not of the culture, hence my reference to the variety portion earlier. And it wasn't until I was coming home one Saturday afternoon that my parents were like, "Oh, why are you home so late? Like your curfew was 9 o'clock." And they didn't tell me that ahead of time. So apparently they thought I knew, but no one decided to communicate that. The second part of it was that like I had a curfew. I didn't know what that meant. This is my first ever relationship. Like, okay, I'll do better next time, but wish you had told me that there was a curfew, right? So taking that and kind of moving forward over the years, I would say that like dating was interesting because sometimes I dated outside the culture and other times I dated within the culture. My preference became within the culture so I could bond over those shared experiences of being in the culture. And I would say now that I happen to have someone who is of the culture, I think it's a great experience for me, and I love that. In terms of the food, so like the both of you, I'm a foodie. I love trying out different cuisines. I would say compared to my parents and their generation, I'm definitely well more versed and I have more of a diverse palate than they do. For them, if it doesn't contain chicken or fish, it's really hard to take them out anywhere. If it wasn't a Caribbean restaurant that might serve chicken fried rice or something similar, they would not go, which is cute because they love to tell me that they want to take me out for my birthday, but it's so hard picking a restaurant that I could take them to. In New York, it was always going to Kaicher's restaurant and bar on Lefferts and Liberty, and Lefferts and Jamaica, my apologies.
Shout out to them.
Yeah, shout out to them. Danny, the owner, is amazing. Love you, Danny. Love
Getting
the
some
team there.
plugs going in this shared experiences.
You never know, Danny. If we're looking for sponsors, feel free to sponsor us. By the way, but yeah, no, like in New York, it was always Kaichor. Everything, birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, whatever. It didn't matter. Kaichor was our spot. And it got to a point where, like, even now over here in Florida, like, we can't just pick a spot, right? It's like if my parents don't like the taste of the food, it's like, all right, well, we'll just eat whatever we have home. And then, if we want to buy something outside, we'll buy something outside. I grew up eating a lot of the Caribbean food. And so my palate is associated with it, but I wouldn't say I prefer it. I'm definitely more American in that sense. And I'll eat pasta, I'll eat burgers, I'll eat whatever else is thrown in front of me. I do occasionally enjoy the Caribbean cuisine, but I would say probably unlike most of our listeners, I don't prefer it. I'm not going to sit there and have rice 3 times a day. I'm not going to have, chicken curry and roti, for breakfast on a.
There goes our sponsorship with Kiteshore.
No,
I'm kidding.
I can still convince Danny. No
Darn
worries. Danny, we still love you. We still love your food, but
We love you, Danny.
it was interesting. I would say. What would you say about your experiences, Kevin? Would you say?
Yeah, mine. It's a simple answer for most of them. Especially for the question about friends and relationships, especially as it pertains to just West Indian culture, like dating within that culture, friends within that culture. And it's got simpler over time. But, I think when I was younger, I think we've all had this. I felt like I was like auditioning versions of myself as I'm evolving as well. Like you're malleable, like your understanding of who you are, I felt like changed like every month in my early 20s. And I think that's common for a lot of folks. Like you're learning so much about yourself, you're learning so much about life, having all of these new experiences and connections. So, I think initially it was difficult to like trying to audition like, yeah, I'm West Indian enough. I know the culture. Like I know the sayings. You eat chicken curry? Yeah, me too. But that's very. Then I realized later in life, like how surface level and trivial that is.
Yeah.
Like not the culture itself, but just trying to connect and fit in by using just these very surface level things, because it kind of makes caricatures of the culture.
Right.
And just like, it feels like a very hollow way to connect with folks, where what I found is like just a bigger unifier, which was, funny enough, the thing that connected to my friends, like when I was just a small kid, was just shared interests. So, understanding who you are, what you like, your hobbies is a big thing. And I think that has connected me with great friends, great, relationships, people I've dated. Like that has been a stronger glue and indirectly has connected me better to that culture, because it wasn't at the forefront of like our bond is just that we're West Indian. We are West Indian, that's a part of who we are, but that's not all that we are. And like when you focus more on like what kind of defines you at the core and what your true interests are, passions are, I think that kind of reverberates, and your people kind of find you. You find your people, they find you. You connect over these shared experiences. Some of us mentioned sports. Some of us, could be within churches. Religion is also an element you mentioned that's been part of your life. But, it's focusing on those intangibles beyond just like those surface level archetypes of
identifiers?
Identifying race or identifying ethnicity, Guyanese, West Indian. It goes beyond that. People are much more complicated. So that's like a bit of advice too, just like forging those good friendships in tandem of understanding the culture.
Right.
Because they will bring that experience. You don't need to just solely focus on unifying on those experiences. And I think that helps people on a larger scale understand the culture, because you'll be able to bring more people in. You'll be able to connect with those even outside of the culture. So that's been my approach to just being just a better steward of that culture and understanding it, is strangely not making it everything, is kind of connecting on more deeper passions. And like I think that's the best thing with dating as well. Just if you can connect on shared passions, I think that'll be a testament of a stronger relationship. And the food part is easy, to your question. Just like I've always had an eclectic palate. I'm a big foodie. I think me and Mahendra share that as well. So I'm always open to trying new things. I think particularly with the Guyanese culture, I think for the most part it's very approachable. I think the most common dishes are shared amongst the West Indies. People have heard of curries, and rice-based dishes are big throughout the West Indies, the Caribbean, throughout the world. I think for me was the religious aspect of it as well, because that does contextualize a big part of the culture. Is, a large majority of Guyanese are religious, and for me, like who I was exposed to were of like the Hindu faith. So
understanding the foods, like when it's appropriate to eat it, like when it's served, like why don't we have this like year round? Why can't I only have pepper pot once a year? Like, like if I'm thinking of like unique like oddities to me, like at the time, those stood out for the Guyanese culture in particular, but that just takes time and curiosity and asking the right questions, and again, just being receptive to connecting on a larger level. And I think when people see that, they're much more willing to kind of bring you in and educate you. I know that's my approach as well. Like, it's all about your attitude. Like, what is this? To like, oh, that's interesting. I've never seen that. That makes such a big difference in the room and your perspective. So I try to kind of maintain that with really all of those things. Food, my approach to relationships, friendships, kind of being a little bit more open-minded about it and connecting on a more deeper level. So.
Oh, yeah. I'll start with food. So food is interesting because it's, with both parents being from the West Indian Guyana background there, I had a lot of that growing up. So, my mom cooked a lot and home-cooked food. Rotis, rices, curries, various forms. And she could cook well. And that's very my mom, and my dad, a little bit. And with those forms growing up there, I got introduced to a lot of things, and was why I found it interesting, because I always found it growing up, eating it, I was like, oh yeah, but I want that. I want all the other stuff from American food, and you would get that when I was at school or when we're out walking around, and you get a slice, you get a hot dog, you get burgers, you get whatever, and introducing it, and my palate has always leaned outside of the West Indian culture, right? In general, that's what I would do. But that relationship with food is, I like it. And I'm a foodie just like both of you guys too. So I enjoy all kinds of food. And I think what it is that people mistake the fact that maybe I don't like it. I do like it. I just don't want it every day.
Fair.
I want a variety of foods every day. And we live in an area that provides us to get many different forms of food, and I like different forms of food. I like to cook different forms of food. I like to buy different forms of food. So I like to try that always, whereas like maybe some parts of our culture, they tend to stick to one or two things, and they like that a lot. And that's okay. It's whatever anybody prefers, right? But I think that food relationship, I'll move it into the friendship part and like colleagues and works. I think food has also helped me establish some of those relationships with people, to have them better connect to me, and what we already connected at work, or we're connected as friends, but showing them another part of me that only I can introduce them to, right? Which is the different curries, the rotis, not when they get from the India restaurants, right, where they're different. The West Indian curries are a lot different, taste different. A roti, where they use naan, we have roti. It's similar, but it's different, right? We have different kind of foods and so on. So I like to explain to people, and for those of you who's listening and watching, it's kind of like the Puerto Rico to Spain, right? There's different variations of that, right? That the food would be kind of different, the languages would be kind of different, right? And the culture kind of be different. So, Guyana is like the Puerto Rico, and like the Spain part would be like India. And like there is a very different variations of stuff, food-wise, culture-wise, language-wise, etc. So I think that also helped to build some more of a rapport with people who've always like, hey, would you like to try some of this? My mom makes a really good chicken curry or whatever. And they go, yes, we would love to. We like Indian food. I'm like, well, you've had Indian food, but have you had West Indian food? Is different. And they're like, okay, yeah, we're interested. And I'll take it and that dish. And there was alarming a number of people who do enjoy it, right? I wouldn't say 100%, but I would say a good majority of people. And it helps me, have that connection with people and like build a bond. So I think with food and friendships there, it's kind of interesting. Friendships with culture too. As an adult now, I find that I'm not afraid of it. You know, when I was mentioning earlier about talking about who we are, what we do, and all the events we go to, and all the stuff like that. And I'm very free with talking about it. The much I know, what I don't know, I say I don't know, right? And I kind of do that. And as far as romantic relationships are concerned, well, you know, I like to define myself. More than define myself, I'm an American. That's what I am, right? I'm an American with a West Indian culture background, is what it is, right? So grew up here, raised here. That's my culture. I have parents that are West Indian, and my background is that West Indian culture. So I tend to date people who are kind of in the ideals of more of an American kind of ideals, right? So I've never really dated a West Indian girl. Oh, well, I would say I never had a girlfriend that was West Indian. I have had a couple dates that was, I would say, a West Indian girl, but didn't go anywhere. But I learned in those very couple dates that there's a big gap, right, of what I understand and what they understand, as opposed to when I date someone that grew up here that's not a West Indian background, whether it be Hispanic or white or whatever. There's that connection there that we kind of really at its core is where I kind of vibe with more. But at the same time, there's also a big part that they're missing, which is the family part of it. You know, of the West Indian family part of it, there's such the integration into relationships and into family and into what we do. And Kevin mentions the odd things that happen, that like at birthday parties and stuff like that. You know, so you have to kind of explain those things. And sometimes it goes well, and sometimes, you know, they're maybe kind of scared by it. You never know, because I've had some relationships that are scared by how much the culture is intertwined in your lives, right?
Yeah.
And then I've had people who are really appreciative of that, right? I have cousins who have married outside. Like on my mom's side, there's many people who've about to get married and still married, or just I don't know what to say. He just got married, so he's like just got married to someone who's not West Indian. She's more Indian, but it's still out of our West Indian culture. And then I have a cousin who she's getting married to someone that's completely out of our culture completely. But what they connect with is that they're Canadian. And they're Canadian together, and they like being Canadian, and they have lots of things that are common, and that's how they blend together and do things together. And then he appreciates her culture, and she appreciates his culture, and they get along just fine. And then both he appreciates her culture, she appreciates his culture for the other one too. And then there's also cousins that have the connection there where they don't really have preferences, but I have cousins that do have preferences because they only want West Indian. And for the reasons that they're tied more to that culture, right? So they're tied more to that culture on that side, where I would say more American. They're a little bit more West Indian, and they kind of tie to that, and that's more familiar. I find it interesting though, because I did mention that one or two, the disconnect was so big that I didn't realize how much of a disconnect it was for me to be connected with someone who's really into the music or really into the food and really into what they're doing. I just noticed in those first couple of days, at least the first one, she was kind of just catering to what I did. Like I could say, hey, do you like this? She's like, yep, sure do. And I was like, find out she didn't even like it at all. You know, she was just kind of doing it because we were at a first date and we're trying to get to know each other. I was just, no, but I really want to know what you're into. And we got into what she really liked, and I realized there's a lot of differences there. And while I still would enjoy doing it, it was just like, it was really a big disconnect. And so those kind of things are interesting to me. Friendship-wise, well, those are kind of like friends are friends. You know, you kind of connect on a different level, and you're not you're not trying to build a life with them. You're trying to build a friendship with them, which is completely different, and those kind of things varies what goes on. We've all had relationships that have up and downs because of those kind of, I guess, roadblocks in a way. But maybe, but then at the same times too, you could see those roadblocks going away depending with the person you're with and how they're doing with it and how you approach what they want. And how they approach what you want, and making those kind of connections and see how things go. But Yeah, that would be my topics on all three. But I guess with the one thing too, I know I mentioned we'll probably wrap that up. But what do you think the state of West Indian culture in the U.S. is currently? Give you some time to think about it. But does anyone want to go first on that, or what do you think? Because I know you're kind of pondering.
I'm happy to chime in first, but can you define it just a little bit more for our listeners? And
It's just a broad question. What do you think the state of West Indian culture is in the U.S. currently? Do you think people are aware of it more these days than they were? Because I know they weren't at all when I was younger.
Sure.
But do you think they're more aware of it now today? Do you think it's what do you think in our culture that like how it's progressing in our society? Any thoughts you have in general?
I think the answer to this, we can touch on it now in this episode, but it may end up being a further topic for another episode further down the line, possibly, because there's a lot we can unpack there. But I would say the simple answer to your question, at least in my opinion, is that there's definitely a more heightened awareness of it. I think now, especially on a global scale, because of the oil reserves that were found off the coast of Guyana, within the East Bank, I believe it was.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Off the coast.
So, wherever that location of the oil wells were, I think that drew a heightened interest in the country. I know my brother works for United, so he always tells me all the time that flights to Guyana from like Texas are just filled, like nonstop filled. And he says that, there's so many people that are going and checking out the country, and
now the roti is good down there, man. The roti.
I mean, the roti, the curry, the hospitality, you name it. There's a lot more food bloggers that are going to Guyana now and start talking about the country, and so I definitely think there's a heightened awareness of it. I think that as we continue to grow as a population here within the United States, I think we start to kind of spread out and go into other states and kind of bring the culture with us and, kind of influence our neighborhoods a little bit, whether, more than likely positive than negative. And I think a lot of that, helps to expand kind of our footprint here in the United States. What would you say, Kevin? Would you agree, disagree?
100%, yeah. I'd echo everything you're saying. I think also, just being in the social media era, we're able to see things in real time. We have more awareness and data to collect. We're in the information era,
right?
The digital era. It's much different than when we grew up, and not to date ourselves, but that wasn't visible to us. People's shared experiences within this culture, and even back in the West Indies, back in Guyana, we have access. And they have access to us of what it means to have a quote-unquote American lifestyle, what it means to have quote-unquote Guyanese lifestyle, and even merging the two. So I think, we have more visibility to the culture, which has heightened the awareness. I think the perception has improved. I think with that data, we see kind of West Indians kind of occupying, the top percentage of the wealth class in America, of minorities, not dominating it, but you see a large population of South Asian doctors and engineers, they occupy some of the highest earning occupations in America. So those are all wins for the culture. Those all build a perception. I think people perceive us as hardworking, well-educated folks, driven folks within the American ecosystem. I think that's just inherent with American culture. I think that plays into the respect and appreciation of it. But at the same time, people are very different. Right. That's a positive stereotype, but we vary across the board, and there's good and bad to every culture, and the ambassadors of that culture, there's better actors than others. But overall, I'd say it's certainly gotten better. I think the awareness, the perception, the appreciation of it, I think that's, more trackable nowadays with just data metrics, with social media. We can see that in live time and how people are connecting to the culture. So overall, yeah, I agree everything what Ryan said, and I think social media has bolstered all of those points.
Okay. I think in the state of the culture there too, I'd like to talk about that too. I think we've expanded a lot. I would love to see, because I think you guys hit some great points. I would love us to see us expand out of Richmond Hill, Queens. That's what I really would do, because I know we've established a nice, great area there where we are together. Like a lot of people migrate to there from New York City, and a lot of it has to do with the family that's there, and a lot of it's friends that are there, and they migrate to that area. But I would love them to spread out a little bit more, and I think we start to see that. I start to see there's a lot of pockets now in California. There's now pockets in Florida, Carolinas now. We start to see a lot of those pockets moving across the country, and I think that's it's really cool, because I think as the culture starts to the West Indian culture starts to spread, people become more aware of us and become more in tuned into society and how we contribute to the American life, right? So yeah, that would be my only point on that. I don't know what it state. I think you guys made some great points on that. Mm-hmm. All right, so for our last thing, we're gonna do something really fun. We're gonna play like a game here. So I mentioned that how much I don't know as much about some of the phrases along the years. I've learned a lot, but I there's some phrases that I don't know, and Ryan might be a little bit more in tune with it. But we're still gonna play this game where Kevin's gonna pull out a what he calls the Guyanese Dictionary, and he's gonna say a word or phrase, and Ryan and I have to take turns guessing on what we think that really means. Okay,
this will definitely be fun, and I still can't believe he found this thing. So
yeah, so this would be fun. So let's. I think we'll just do 3 rounds, 3 words, and then we'll see who gets the best out of 3. Right?
All
Sounds
right.
good.
Let's go for it.
All right. So first up, your first word, gentlemen, is Dullahan. What does that mean?
Okay, I'll go first. So the Dullahan, is it a promised bride? Like a bride, like an engagement of some sort of bride? I think that's what I thought it might be, but that's my guess. So I don't know. Ryan, you go with your guess.
I think you're close. I think it's related to wedding, and it's one of the bride or groom. Dullahan, I think that's the groom, if I remember correctly.
No, well, you're both right in the thematic use of the word. It is around Indian Hindu wedding culture that, again, we've talked on as a big part of the Guyanese culture. Just so many people have that faith, but it means it's a pronoun, so it's just bride, and that's bride.
Wrong gender.
That's bride within the Hindu wedding terminology.
So it's just bride.
It's just bride. It's a
Man,
pronoun.
I was so close with engagement.
Yes.
So I was like, oh, okay.
Yes, and there's more.
I was closer than Ryan. That was pretty good.
I mean, I just went wrong gender completely.
Yeah, Dulha would be the
I always
groom.
get those two mixed up.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so 0-0. Okay, go next.
Sure. Okay, so gentlemen, your next word will be jare.
Oh, well, this one I think I know, because it's like, you jare someone, it's an act to bless them in a ceremony. It doesn't have to be in a ceremony per se, but it's part of a religious ritual where they bless you. What's your guess?
So I think you're very close. From what I understand it to be, it's like if someone casts a negative connotation on you, you perform that version of a religious function known as a jare to remove that negativity from your life or from your person. Am I right there?
That is a technical definition of it, but Ryan lists it. So, simply put, as warding off the bad eye, which is common in a lot of cultures, but the actual act of jarring is using a pointer broom, old style broom that are just reeds of wood to make a makeshift broom, but you use one particular reed of it, and sometimes they might burn the tip, but it's meant as a ritual to ward off the bad eye of
The bad eye meaning bad things.
Yes,
Right.
just yeah.
See, and I definitely didn't know a
element of
pointer broom
negativity.
was used for that, so that's interesting.
Traditionally, yes, and people have this. So these words evolve, and I think people have different interpretations of it from how they've seen, like if it's an act done, obviously, but
So would I get like a half point? Because
you a
that's
half-
what I meant
give you a
by
half
it.
point.
It's like that's a ward off bad spirit. I mean, I did say that it's a blessing to get those bad things out of you, right? That's what I
Sure.
meant it to be. So I don't know if I get a half point or a full
Well,
point for that.
well,
but
give it to you just because blessing is associated all positive.
right.
Sure.
Where this is like inherently a negative thing and a ritual to remove that negative.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So
I guess
1-1.
1-1.
All right. We're going into the final battle. Where are we going?
Okay. So the last one I'll give you is Pagua.
I got this one. It's also known as Holy, and it's to celebrate springtime.
Well, it's I even do better. It is also known as Holy. I know that for sure too, but it's the celebration of good over evil.
That is correct. I guess I'll give Mahendra maybe like 2 points for that. Is that right? So, I mean, the literal, you're both correct. I mean, the literal, it's a celebration, it's a ceremony as well. There's religious aspects of it too, but it's an abridged version of Holi, which is the Hindu and Hindi term for that ceremony. But it does signify like good versus evil, and it's a festival of colors as well. Pagua is what has been used in the West Indies predominantly, and I think has evolved from just the languages borrowed, during the migration. A lot of it, Ryan mentioned, it comes from Bhojpuri, but combines a lot of different dialects. But yeah, I would say you're both correct in that. Just in what the actual name of the ceremony is, the translation to Hindi, and then obviously the broader meaning. So
Sure.
all kind of 3 good words that I think are very good anecdotes of Guyanese culture and some things that are inherently of that culture that might be foreign to an outsider.
For
All right.
for any of our listeners that are roasting us in the comments here, we did our best. All right, just fair enough.
I think you did pretty good.
Yeah, these are good ones, and I think I'm fair in saying that we call this a tie for this game.
Works
even
for me.
though we both missed out on that first one. That's what happened there. That's the thing. But yeah, I think that's pretty good. Just to wrap this up, this was our first podcast episode, and this was about the West Indian culture. I'd like to thank Ryan and Kevin here, and for being part of this podcast right here. We're going to join us weekly to have express other topics and so on. Of course, if anyone wants to advertise, please reach out to CastNet at 2026@gmail.com. And for those of you listening, we hope to see you in our next podcast. Thank you.
Thank you all for listening.
Have a good night.